This is about workflow notes. Here's what you will run into if you are that rare individual who is doing kind of sort of something similar to what I'm doing, which is, you know, a long form, fairly complex animated cartoon of some kind. What I've been doing is creating the sequence of basically my keyframes, and I've talked in other videos about doing what's called building out. The idea is to, in other words, this drawing alone, if it was in the form of a just a storyboard sketch, it kind of tells a story. It says something to you about what's happening here. This guy's got a knife pointed at him, and he's probably saying something, right? Okay, and then this, and then she says something to him, kind of moves in on her. So you can see there's a story. And if I really wanted to understand the story, I can just hit the comma and period keys to toggle between the drawings, or of course I could also hit the up and down arrow keys. And I can express the idea in real time. Blah 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 blah. Yeah, blah 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 blah. Yeah, blah 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 blah. Okay, you get the idea. So the question becomes, and this is, you wouldn't think it's this big of a question, but it turns out it's really a big important question. What is the order in which you're going to go from this step to this step, and what are the typical layers that we're going to expect to find in our project? And the reason it's important is the question becomes, at what point is your project going to become cumbersome and non-performant? That's the problem. When you're dealing with a pencil test or a single level that just is a sketch, no big deal. It's always performant. If you hit the L key to loop your sequence of images, it's going to play back in real time, 24 frames a second. Okay? So there is a tug of war that goes on between moving towards the quality or the character of the finished project, which we're getting close here because we've got the background in there, we've got shadows in there, we've got the ink and paint. This shot is actually probably done. Well, I'm going to pull up this other version of the scene that's called this is called the battle. I'm going to pull up the battle timed. Okay? So in the battle timed, I actually turned the backgrounds off, and the reason I did that is because once you start hitting Alt down arrow or Alt up arrow in order to insert frames and basically spread those keyframes out, in practice what's going to happen is, you might spread them out, and then you'll say, well, I want a little more I want the guy to turn his head a little bit while he's talking, let's say. So now am I going to create drawings for that? Or am I going to maybe do something like insert, like I'll show you here if I saved it. Like here what I did was I inserted a plastic tool layer so that fairly economically we get a tilt of the head here, another tilt of the head there, and I actually generated another mesh here. It looks a little stupid, but it's okay because it goes by really quickly. So what you see is this. Okay, let's mask that out so that, okay, so that's what you see. So this looks pretty bad. It's deformed poorly, but basically it doesn't matter. And plus, if it was a really big deal, you could always just delete this keyframe here, right? And take this one, move it upstream. Okay. So I'm going to put this on 2s just so it goes by quickly. Okay, if I click too quickly, it takes it as a double click. But so now you got, boom. Okay. So anyway, because it moves quickly, it's okay that first frame is a little bit winky. It looks like it didn't really do me any good to make the change. So That's fine. And of course, I could always go in and hit the X tool and just make some judicious adjustments. Or what might happen is I find out that those judicious adjustments cause other problems. Okay? And it's good that I'm demonstrating that, because guess what? That's always going to happen. As you build out, as you go from just one simple stick figure or one simple drawing and expand out, and you add keyframes and you add different shots, and then maybe you want to go in with a plastic tool or some other articulation or some other, I guess articulation's a good word, maybe break your character into pieces so you can do some puppet animation and get some production value that way. Every single step you take creates finer and finer and finer granularity of detail. Well, that's great. The problem is you will reach a point where adding more granularity of detail causes the application to become non-performant. So if I hit the L key, right now it's keeping up pretty well. Okay, it's keeping up pretty well. But let's go ahead and, I mean, let's just see how it does. I think, I've got a fast machine. Okay, so I can be pretty liberal with the, with the layers. But let's just go ahead and see how it does. So you see this turning red here every once in a while. Not too bad, actually. It's fairly performant in this case. Even with the plastic tool, it's doing okay. Okay, so, but remember, I quite specifically turned this, I turned all these other layers off. Okay, there's the tint. Okay, now let's try it. My computer's keeping up okay. It's doing all right. Let's just hang with it here for a minute. So in my case, I'm lucky because I have a 12-core machine. Seems to keep up pretty well. But the point is that as you build out and add more detail, you're going to run into performance problems. So there's a tug of war between there's a temptation to go ahead and time the thing out actually early. Even when it's at the storyboard or animatic stage, there's a temptation to go ahead and expand the space between the keyframes like we have here. So there's quite a lot of space, as you can see, between drawings. And I did that by simply going to whatever drawing I'm on, and I hit Alt-A. And when I do that, if I actually do the opposite, if I hit Alt, I said Alt-A, I meant Alt-down arrow. If I hit Alt-up arrow, watch what happens. Let's just be patient here. You see what happens? Okay. So now I determined on another video, I mentioned that OpenToon seems to do a pretty good job of inserting those frames at just about 24 frames a second. And so you almost could speak the dialogue, and it's gonna while you're doing this, and it'll actually come out timed pretty close to what you want. Well, yes and no. That's actually not true once you've got 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 levels of backgrounds and shadows and everything. All of a sudden, OpenToon starts bogging down a little bit. Doesn't go at 24 frames a second. So now you sit here and you do your timing in real time, and you find out, well, it's not in time. I actually have to compensate now. I have to make every single shot just a little longer than I think. Okay, that gets obnoxious in a hurry, because you're constantly guessing. Okay. So again, like I say, this is the tug of war you run into if you're trying to do a large or a complex or a cool project. You're going to run into this problem where the temptation is you want to see it play back. You want to see the whole thing, right? But if you go ahead and time it out, not only do you have the problem of making sure it plays back in time, but you also have this problem of you're constantly doing this. You're doing this like all the time. You're constantly going, well, I got to reset the start marker. you know, and then go here, blah, 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 because that's what I want to see now, you know, or whatever. There's this constant. So now what happens is instead of drawing pictures and telling stories, you're spending a lot of time dealing with the mechanics of just interacting with the software. So the question is, how do you avoid that? You want to avoid that as long as possible. What is the key to avoiding it? In my view, the key is to put off the timing step as long as possible. Okay, so if I'm going to go ahead and add layers of detail here, then I'm going to still keep it really loose and just use the up and down arrows to just toggle through it and make sure it's pretty, you know, it feels about like what I want. And if I look at this shot right here and I say, well, I want him to turn his head in mid-sentence, then all I'm going to do is insert one frame and then maybe create another drawing, or maybe introduce the plastic tool and add a deformation. I'm going to hit Control Z because I really didn't want that. And then this keyframe, I'm going to go ahead and drag to the north, so I'm not like thinking about it when I make changes. But and plus, by the way, significantly, I am not dealing here with the key drawings of my characters. This is actually the background layer, so that's a danger. You know what layer you're on. You know what you're working with. But as I looked at this, the workflow that got me to the point where I am now, the steps are something like this. Number one, sticks and balls. Just figuring out who's going to be where and what they kind of sort of look like they're doing action-wise. Then you got a pencil test. Then you got ink and paint. Then you got shadows. You've got cast shadows, which is important to make a distinction between body shadows and cast shadows, because if you want to work fast, then when you do your body shadows, you want to be able to paint outside the lines. Okay, so let's turn this level off, and just to keep it fair, I'll turn that level off too. So as we go through here, early on I was being careful, but you can see here I'm bleeding outside the lines a lot. Well, that's okay. I can go outside the lines all I want, for the simple reason that I have a plugin that clips the shadow to the character's body. Okay. Well, that's awesome, but it presents a new problem, and the problem is that if you have cast shadows on the floor or whatever in the same level, all of a sudden those shadows are invisible because they're clipped to the body. And cast shadows aren't on the body, they're on the floor or the wall or whatever they are. So you kind of have a couple levels of shadows. Then you got to paint your backgrounds. You've got to insert your mouth shapes. So my thinking is, if I have a single drawing here, I should have an adjacent column or level that has the mouth shapes, and probably a separate level for the eye shapes as well. Okay. So I'm going to put in mouth shapes and eye shapes. And then I personally think it's going to come up very frequently that you're going to want to have a plastic level layer. Because the cool thing is, you can generate, like I could generate a deformation cage with the plastic tool, and then on this drawing do it again. Generate a whole new cage, build a whole different skeleton, and I can do it all on one single level where it keeps switching between meshes. If you don't know about the plastic tool, then that probably doesn't make sense to you, but if you do, then you know that it's kind of significant that you have that flexibility. Okay, but I think that's going to come up frequently, that we're going to want to use the plastic tool to add a little bit of movement to just keep things from being too static. So what happens then? Well, we have to route the appropriate layers to the plastic tool if we're going to do that. So the shadows have to be routed to the plastic tool too, because when you deform your character, you got to have the shadows deform as well, right? Okay. So then you're going to do the plastic tool tweaks. You know, any additional, let's call it secondary animation with the plastic tool. And then that finally takes you to the point where you can do your timing. So if you're going to do your timing, using alt up arrow down arrow is a really good way to do it. What you're probably going to find is you want to say, hey, let's just turn off every layer except this one, the one I just turned off. That's actually the only one you want to have on, so that it's still performant. But my sense is that you want to take the actual final timing and put it off until the last possible moment. Really, it's almost the last step. The final step would probably be to go ahead and tune up the lip sync. So once you've got it timed out, then you got to make sure the lip shapes show up where they're supposed to, you know. So working that way, what that means is that through most of the workflow, you're going to be in this form. You're going to be, it's like playing an instrument, actually. You're going like this. You're saying blah 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 blah, you know, and you're using those arrow keys to just just feel it. Like I said, it's like playing a piano or something. You know, it's really like playing an instrument, and that's really beneficial because it allows you to just keep, you know, the exact timing doesn't matter that much at this point. And besides, once you're ready to edit this thing, don't you think that the timing's going to change a little bit? I've never seen it fail. It always changes. So therefore, if you know the timing's going to keep changing right up till the last minute, you might as well put off figuring out the timing until the last minute. And so with that in mind, my strategy is to go ahead and keep it in this form, just one keyframe after another that's telling my story as long as possible. And then when we finally get to that ending point, we'll go ahead and turn all the layers off except for the characters, time it, make sure it plays back and feels about right, maybe turn on the lip sync layer so you can see that too. Then turn all the layers back on and render it. So the idea is that right up until as late as possible, I'm just feeling the timing. I'm going to play it like an instrument, as opposed to stretching this out. You know, it's funny because that temptation to time it too early, it's always there, because at every step, by inserting frames, you can go ahead and time it. But I think it's probably wiser to build out from the simplest expression possible until all the elements are in place and you really know what the timing is going to be. And frankly, I would recommend a final step before you time it out where you look at every single one of these frames. And I may change my mind later when I do this, but actually go in and map it out on paper and say, hey, this I know this is going to go for 2.5 seconds. So I'm not thinking in terms of frames. I'm thinking in terms of time. She's got a line of dialogue. She's going to say, I want it to take 2.5 seconds. So, okay, that's going to be 48 plus 12. So that's going to be 60 frames. And then actually have a piece of paper with a list of times and just lay them all in. Just block it all in really, really rapidly. You know, test that it plays back properly with just the character level. Because remember, at this point, I know what the final thing's going to look like. Okay, that's it right there. I mean, obviously in this case the mouth isn't in there, but I know what it's going to look like. So therefore, you know, I don't care. I don't need to see it play back. You want to know what you're doing so well that you don't need to see it play back in real time. Because if you time all this out, now you've got a sequence that's, you know, it's going to be several thousand frames. It might be 6,000 frames long. And now every time you want to check one thing that wasn't quite right, you're fighting the software. You're having to scroll, you know, through 6,000 frames to find your spot and set different start and end markers. You can do that, but I'm telling you, you don't want to. You don't want to until you have no choice. By the way, this is the sequence I worked on yesterday. I'm pretty happy with how it came out. So since this is my YouTube channel, I'm going to show this. It's pretty funny. Actually, okay, after she takes a swipe, she's got a little bit of a, she's got a little bit of a dress problem. See, I wanna be able to play this, so I'm going boom, 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 boom. So now I'm going back over it again. I'm just feeling the timing of it. Boom, boom, right there, and then tick 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 tick. And then she kind of reams the guy. So anyway, like I said, all I'm doing now is I'm reiterating for my YouTube audience what I'm learning myself, and I'm always really aware of any step you take in the production process that all of a sudden slows everything down, and just everything grinds to a halt because you're just, all your time is being spent interacting with the software because it can't keep up with your brain. The software doesn't know what you want, and you really want to avoid that. It really squelches the creative process, let's put it that way. And so anyway, with that in mind, I'm pretty happy with how things are turning out. And I'm going to keep going on this track. I'm going to wind up, this literally is going to be a multi-thousand frame sequence when it's all timed out. And I don't want to deal with that until I absolutely have to. So anyway, that's it for today. And I'm sure, of course, there will